Hello, listeners, and welcome to another episode of the Leadership Connection. I am Tara Holwegner, your guest host. Happy to be here for yet another episode. And joining me today is Bambi Hoyt. Bambi Hoyt's career spans 20 years of experience with the Department of Defense, federal government, pharmaceutical, and consumer goods industries. She holds a bachelor's degree in communications from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, go Tar Heels, and a Master of Professional Communications from Clemson University. So when Bambi's not rolling up her sleeves to find new ways to support the DoD and federal clients, you might find her and her husband traveling around the world, especially at Disney. I know you guys love Disney World, and I've frequently asked you for advice, actually, about how to master Disney. So maybe we'll hear more about that in your leadership stories, because Disney has, they're the behemoths, right, in terms of entertainment industry, and have some great leadership mantras. But let's talk more about you and about when you first recognized that you were a leader. So can you tell me a little bit about the project or moment when Bambi Hoyt realized, you know what, hey, I'm a leader now. I'm in a leadership position.
Sure, no, absolutely. And first, just thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this. It's going to be fun.
Yeah.
So the first time, it's kind of weird. I was kind of getting in the mental zone for this conversation today, and you always want to kind of talk about first. And I'm an only child, so I grew up in the middle of nowhere, North Carolina, in the mountains. And so, just as an only child, I think sometimes you have those inherent leadership skills because you don't always have other folks to rely on.
Right.
I grew up in a neighborhood where I was the only kid, so I had to keep myself entertained and all that. And so when I think of, initial leadership times, I could go back as early as, high school. I won't bore you guys with all my high school details, but, just various, clubs and organizations and, being a leader in those. Sometimes an elected leader, sometimes just spearheading things,
right.
College and college projects. So it's interesting to think that, the first time, because I think we experience those firsts throughout life, but from a true career perspective, we'll focus on this industry that I'm currently in. The first real, oh my gosh, I'm a leader now in my big girl job.
Right.
was actually the first project I worked at Life Cycle Engineering. So I was brought in really early in a white paper phase for a large software development, what became a large software development application in the early days of agile development. And that was kind of a new thing.
You're aging yourself now. Don't do that, Bambi.
I know. Just wait. You'll get some 80s references later and you'll really know how old I am, right? So
nice.
But yeah, I started out actually as a technical writer, helping to put that white paper together. And,
okay.
A lot of times people think leader and manager or leader in specific titles that are, high
right.
up in an organization. But, I think leadership can be at any level. And I think, it's just, running with something and owning it and taking responsibility for your tasking and helping others when necessary. And so I did that on that project. And we started out as a small team of 3. And eventually grew. We started out as a white paper. The platform grew to over 40,000 users supporting the DoD in various ways. And, it's just kind of weird to think about, little, 30-something me, leading something that touched that many folks across the globe. It's pretty cool.
Well, that's exciting. And I think that is something that, that motivates you, being in software development and cybersecurity, which is a big concern, for a lot of our listeners today. Speaking of motivation, I'd like to know, what do you think is the primary motivating factor behind how you lead, behind your leadership style?
To me, it's really about the people. I've been tagged various times as the den mother in my leadership roles. I think it's important as a leader to help people learn and grow, and develop in their career. And sometimes, they develop so far that, they might develop themselves out of, a current position, and they can move
Right.
into bigger things. And that's really exciting. And I also think that an element that I really latch onto for leadership is really running interference for roadblocks.
Yes.
I think it's important to teach your team, how to fish, make sure that folks know how to do what they're supposed to do. But sometimes things happen that are outside of their control. And,
Right.
As a leader, I think it's our responsibility to help eliminate some of that noise so they can really focus on the mission and the goals of the tasking they're working.
Yeah, and what they're good at. And you said something a minute ago that we've actually in the podcast we've discussed before, how leadership doesn't necessarily have to be a title. It doesn't necessarily have to be a certain level in the organization, that you can have leadership at any level. And I think, what you shared there about helping people learn and grow, running interference for them, and teaching them how to fish. I mean, you're enabling people's innate leadership, to come out in that way, right? And for them to develop. So I think that's an awesome way to give back, as a leader, and try to create those future leaders for tomorrow. So let's talk a little bit we're going to talk a little bit about external influences. And we'll start, with, if there's anyone, and maybe you've had many, but choose one, someone that you've looked to as like a mentor or a role model that you'd like to talk about in our podcast today, about who has influenced your career, and a few things that you've learned from that person that you think are really important to you today.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. There are many. Again, that's something else that starts very early in life, with teachers
Right.
and professors and, different folks you kind of meet along the way. And I think, I think there's just certain folks that just kind of stand out, when you reflect upon your life and your career, who really,
Right.
I don't think there's a single person that says, okay, I've molded Tara into this piece of
In
clay,
my image.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's
like a statue, right? Because we're not, right? We're constantly molding. So we're not the Michelangelo's La Pieta, in the Vatican. I mean, we're constantly evolving, right? Because our environments are constantly changing. I mean, you were talking about early days of Agile. We'll just call it Agile. Yeah. And think about how, things have evolved, even just that project management methodology or software development methodology, has evolved and grown, and the tools that have come in to support that. So, I mean, that, we as people and leaders are the same, right?
Oh, absolutely, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we gain certain nuggets from folks along the way, and that helps make us better. And so, so within, my current industry, Phil Hartley was actually the person who hired me on at Lifecycle Engineering many years ago. And I always felt that he was just a really good leader, because he would push his team, he would push me to do things to get me out in front of people. So they might be tasks. I remember I used to get irritated at him because he'd say, hey, can you send an email to so-and-so? And he'd tell me exactly what to put in the email and exactly what to attach. And I'm like, well, you could have done it in the time that you told me exactly what you wanted, right?
Right.
But what he did is in doing that, the email would come from me, and then people would start to, they would listen to me more. I'm not just, a flower in the background, I'm a voice on the team. And I think, at the time I didn't get it, but now I do. And I think it's important to, put people in those positions so that they can, they can get some of the credit, and they can, they can shine versus always having that leader in the front who's, the image of everything. So Phil was really good at that. And he was also really good about protecting his team, which as I said earlier, is really important. I mean, if one of us really screwed up, we would present a solid front as a team, and he would take the blame for whatever we screwed up on. And then, of course, in the background, he's working with us, making sure that we fix or mitigate anything, any oopses or accidents. But he wasn't one that would, throw you to the wolves. He would take the blame for our mistakes and then, push us to help to fix them. So.
Right. So, I think that that's something that kind of speaks to what you were talking about earlier about helping people learn and grow. And part of learning, part of growth is sometimes making mistakes and having failures.
Yep.
And learning how to, and being able to learn from that to do better. But also having the courage as a leader to say, you know what, I'm the one accountable here, and for sticking up for the team. I think that's a really good example of integrity.
Yep,
and courage.
Absolutely. And I
think understanding
too,
accountability. Because have you ever seen a leader not take accountability? Have you ever seen that happen?
Yeah,
I know
I'm sure.
have.
Yeah.
And I'm like, the cringe-worthy moments where you're just like, oh gosh, it's hard.
Yep.
It's hard to do that, but that's why the role is there, I guess. So
sure. Well, and I think too, as you look back at folks that you've learned from, it's always good to lift up the positive folks, but there's also, those really bad leaders, or those just folks who are just, everybody's, can envision that one person who you just hate working with, but they're still, they're still around. Right. And I think, but I think something positive that you can take from that is, especially if you want to be a leader, is, sometimes it's hard to see what's right to do, but it can be easier to see what you shouldn't do. And so when you see those qualities in a leader and you're like, oh, that's awful, it's just a good mental note to take that away and say, I need to look in the mirror every day and make sure that I can look at myself and say, I'm not doing those things. Right.
Right. So, I like that. I may not know exactly what's right, but I'm going to try not to do what I think is wrong or not right, or not within my integrity as, as the one responsible, to be a leader. So there's all kinds of leadership models out there, right? The ones that we emulate, and then ones that we learn from in other ways. So one of my favorite questions that I've been asking people, I've got two, but this is the first one, is if you could have, coffee or tea, beverage of your choice, with anyone in the world, alive or dead, fictional or real, who would it be and why?
So I would like to give you this profound, here's this philosopher, or here's this just wonderful industry leader, but I am a Harry Potter nerd. And so I have to say J.K. Rowling, and I think, of course we would talk all kinds of Harry Potter fun first, but after we've had a few spiked coffees,
butterbeers, maybe.
Right. I think it would be interesting. If you think about it, the Phoenix is a big symbol in her books. And if you think about it, kind of that rebirth and that Phoenix image is really what happened with her. Right. So for folks who may not know, she started out, in life, and she'd had kind of a rough run. She was struggling. She was living in her car at one point, and the one thing that she was just really good at was writing. And so that's something that she did for herself. And then she started, submitting what became the Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone to multiple publishers. And she was rejected many, 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 many times. Right. But she persevered, she kept at it, and eventually, the fish hit the line, right? And and we all know the story from there. And so I think, from a leadership perspective, sticking to it, not giving up, really knowing what your strengths are and pushing forward with those. I think that's something pretty cool that we could take, from her book, or books, but But
Right.
the geek in me also just wants to know all the, the characters that didn't make it into the story. So.
A complete world. Yeah.
Yeah.
That the ones that were, the characters that were cut.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. The storylines that never made it in. That's really interesting. Yeah. So knowing what I wrote down, was like knowing your strengths and believing in that and having the courage. Again, we're back to, having the courage and the belief in yourself,
Yep.
to follow your own leader, follow your own lead,
Yep.
to follow what's inside. Um, let's stay with the fun questions because you're giving a lot of fun answers. So, my other favorite question: if you could go back in time and give a piece of advice to your younger self, maybe it's that girl in high school, maybe it's the 30-year-old, on the technical writer on the Agile project. I don't know. But if you were to go back and give yourself a piece of advice, what would it be?
Well, first, I've seen Back to the Future. I've seen all the Marvel movies, and we all know you should never go back in time and talk to your former self because that just causes problems. So I'm going to throw
It
that,
does.
So,
Okay.
but we'll assume that Thanos is not going to come and explode the world and do his little snap. I think, truthfully, I wouldn't change anything. So I would be very,
Mhm.
I mean, and this is like a true, honest feeling. I think that I don't really believe in regrets, and a lot of times people are like, oh, well, I wouldn't have done X or I wouldn't have done Y. But I think there were times when I may not have gone down the right path or I didn't make the right choice. But if I
Right.
hadn't made those mistakes and errors and bad calls, then I wouldn't have learned, and I wouldn't, I don't think I'd really be where I am today. So I think what I would say is just stay the course,
Mhm.
because it's been a pretty good ride so far, and I think I wouldn't want to change any of it. So,
Well, then let's get back to kind of talking more about, you as a leader in your professional experience and your career to date. But I think that's a beautiful statement, is, don't have regrets. And yeah, I might need to adjust that question because you're right. The Back to the Future continuum is a pretty strong message about
or
not.
just lead in with that multiverse, and you're good.
Yes, because it will. I'm gonna say next time it'll be in the multiverse, so we have different options happen in different.
There you go.
In different sets of time and space. So what do you consider your most significant professional accomplishment to date? Describe that, please, and how it happened.
Sure. So I'm going to give you the cheesy answer, and then I'm going to give you the legitimate answer. So the cheesy yet truthful answer is, it's been pretty cool. I have been in the industry for a good long time. Mm-hmm. And I remember folks that I worked with early on in my career, and they were like early on in their career, and I've seen them grow and evolve, and some of them are branch heads, and for in various government offices. Some of them are just super strong software developers working on some really cool projects, and so they've I've been in this long enough that I've seen people kind of start out, and now they are leading and evolving. Mm-hmm. and that's my cheesy answer. So that's pretty cool, and to have been a part of that is pretty cool. But
I wouldn't call it cheesy. I would call it, that's your altruistic leadership style.
Yeah, right there you go. Yeah. But it's just kind of all the feels, and I'm very Scottish and British, so I try to mask those. So but no, I would say from just a specific accomplishment. There was a period at Lifecycle Engineering when I was brought in to help with what's called a technology readiness assessment. And so basically, there are certain milestones for a project or a product that's delivered. And once it reaches a certain point, a team of scientists and technical folks are brought together to assess the technology and make sure it's safe, make sure it's secure, make sure that it's going to perform as it's needed and all that. And so these are all folks who are not direct, these are external forces who are not currently working to put that product together. And it was I think it was about an 8-month effort. And so little me was brought in with this massive team of, just genius brains, think the movie Hidden Figures and all those folks that were in that room at NASA, trying to figure out what to do. And my job was to kind of lead the team through that assessment and put together a report that Congress had to review and approve. And so, I didn't present to Congress or anything like that, but it's just kind of cool. Yeah, right. But it's just, that was just one of those things that you just kind of look at yourself and think you're so small. But, I had something that at least a couple of people skimmed through, at some point in Congress. And that was pretty cool.
Yeah, those are high stakes, and I know that many of our listeners, are in the midst of potentially procuring new software for their CMMS, or are dealing with potential ramifications of cybersecurity issues, so to be able to have been, to have experience on such the breadth of full software development, from the initial concept, of something that's gonna support our nation and our nation's security all the way through Congress. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive. So thank you for sharing. So we've talked a lot about, and I'm curious what your answer to this question is going to be, because you're such a positive person. So tell me about one of the most difficult obstacles that you've had to face as a leader, and how'd you get through it?
Sure. Well, I think people and personalities in general are always the most difficult thing to navigate, because, everybody has different pressure points. Everybody's sensitive to different things. Everybody has different motivators. And that's, it's funny.
You can't program humans.
Exactly.
Like you can software.
Like we always say, the technology is actually the easy part. It's the people side
absolutely.
that's hard, and, everybody's still got a little bit of that high school drama, like just waiting to pop out, So I think that's been just in general and continues to be the biggest challenge. But specifically, at one point I was leading another large software development project, and I had about 60 people that on the team, and multiple consultants and contractors, working to get the job done. So kind of not one single manager, so to speak. And I was actually brought in as the cleanup crew. Because, folks weren't getting along, things were kind of going south. And so my job was to come in, take over the project and get things back on track.
Wow.
Right? And a lot of the things, after interviewing everybody on the team and trying to figure out what the catalyst was for the poor performance, it was truly the people and personalities. Folks just didn't want to play well together. And, being new to that project and trying to figure out, where that bad apple, so to speak, was. And it doesn't mean a person's always a bad apple in every case. It just, they may not be in the right seat on the bus, might need to put them in a different role, or it might just, they may not be a culture fit, right, for that specific project. So kind of coming in and diagnosing that.
Right. Or they may not have an understanding of the shared goals of the project. I mean, what's the root cause there?
Yeah, exactly. So navigating that, and then I figured out a couple of elements that needed to be changed, and one of those was a person, and basically that person had been taking on not just the profit and loss and the cost, schedule, performance pieces of the project, but they were also had to burden themselves with taking on the technical as well. So they were also like the large scale technical lead. And so we talked through, made an adjustment, took that profit
Mhm.
loss, cost schedule, performance piece off of their plate, made them my chief scientist, and
Right.
he did a phenomenal. I mean, it was like no looking back, and he was happier, the team was happier, things worked better, because all that extra weight that he was imposing on his own
Well, that
shoulders
kid had
was
had
weighing him
competing
down.
priorities,
Hmm.
that was because the P&L could sometimes compete with, the desire for some sort of excellent functionality or something like that. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. But
totally.
having those conversations, it's hard. And I think that's
Oh,
always,
yes.
most people, I think most positive and most good leaders are really good at have, conversations and communication. And, but it's still, I don't know. I think it's hard. I mean, it's really hard to look somebody in the face and say, hey, you're screwing up and we're going to make a change because of it. I mean, you're not going to be brutal, you're going to give them tough love, but it's, it's just, I think it's the worst part of the job, but also one of the most critical components of the job.
Right. So I'm guessing that's where that communication degree that you got is coming in handy as a
There you
leadership,
go. Yep.
right?
Yep. Yep.
Well, speaking of skills and experiences, education is there are there any skills like communication or any more that you would list that have been instrumental um, in how you feel as being successful as a leader?
Sure. I mean, communication obviously is at the
Yeah.
heart of it. And I don't think anybody can ever be 100% proficient. I mean, there's always areas to improve,
Right.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I would say the thing that's probably been, I don't know why, but it's been most surprising is, you kind of you don't think about having to write a lot of times in a leadership position, but you think, being in meetings and conversing and, a lot of verbal communication. But
Right.
I think that nonverbal communication and the ability to write, whether it's write directions to, to your team for what, how you think something should be done, whether it's, delicately having a conversation over email or now things like Slack, all those, what we used to call back in the day, those chat boxes.
Yeah.
I think it's been surprising to me how important those things are. And I've got a knack for nonverbal communication. So a lot of times, I can tell if something's on somebody's mind. I may not know what it is, but I know I need to pull it out. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of folks don't have that knack, and I haven't figured out how to teach it yet. But it's an important one.
Right. Well, it's a learned skill to effectively convey um, your position or um, to effectively represent yourself in written writing. I mean, now who even does phone calls anymore? It's more like texting or online meetings or
Right.
face to face. Seems to have taken over. So syntax, and tone, all those things that we learned in writing class, I do think they're coming back more as more important today. As we're even using social media more
Yep.
in business and in that in that regard as well. So let's go back out, from a little bit from talking about real specific, experiences and discussion. Let's kind of pull back out a little bit more and get more macro. So, what, in your own words, are two or three things that make a great leader?
So I'll start out with some that we've already kind of talked about a little, right?
Right.
I think, taking the blame and giving credit, I think that's really important, which kind of goes hand in hand with just taking care of your people.
Yes.
I think if your people, and your people doesn't necessarily always have to mean, again, I'm managing this group, I'm only taking care of mine. It's your peers, it's the people who are on your team, whatever that team might look like.
Mm-hmm.
But taking care of your people and making sure that you have their back, because if people know that you have their back, they will often have your back. And it just
Mm-hmm.
trust starts to evolve and build and grow. So I think that's really critical. And then, the last thing that I would say, which I think it's a delicate balance, but leaders need to be proactive, and they need to be willing to delegate tasks, or work with others to get things done. But I also think it's important for a leader to grab the shovel sometimes. So if sometimes resources just aren't there, sometimes there's time crunches, sometimes things just happen. And I've seen some leaders that'll just let their team just be crushed, and meanwhile that the leader's going out for like drinks and cocktails and the team's just dying,
Oh boy.
right? And to me, I think if you're, as a leader, there's no job that's beneath you. I think it's important to grab that shovel and chip in and help everybody get over the hump if that hump appears.
Right. So I'm leading by example.
Yep.
And that proves credibility, which proves trust. And I think that's a really strong message, again, about, integrity and accountability. No job is too menial.
Right.
Every job is important. I think that can also show, how what could be perceived, as a menial task, how important it really is to the goals of the organization. Right. Yeah. So you are having to input this data. Okay. Well, how does that roll up to the measures, especially for our listeners, to the measures of the plant? So, if you're not entering in, your work order comments, or if you're not entering good data into the system, it's going to have an impact down the line, which could not only impact the management, quote unquote, management reports, but could impact your ability to get investments to make improvements. So everybody's part of, but that's building that vision too, right? And it kind of goes back to what you were discussing earlier about, one of the biggest obstacles was, trying to create that shared understanding and shared vision between the team of how that project was supposed to work, and the goals of that project, and take away those barriers and competing priorities.
Yeah, I think it also gives it can also give additional insight, right? Because a lot of times it's easy to look at somebody else's tasking or their job and say, "Oh, that was easy." It's only gonna take so and so 10 minutes to enter that data into the system that could then get out to the facility. But then when you get it, you're sitting in their seat and you're at their keyboard and you're trying to enter it in because you're helping them get through something, and there's all these things you didn't think about, or all these things you didn't consider, right? And so now you understand why it might take an hour versus 10 minutes.
Right. Or different defects in the system. There's waste that has been somewhere introduced that prevents efficiency. And so another one thing that we've also discussed with several leaders on this podcast is they call it Gemba walks, or management by walking around. So being visible, being where the work is done, which is what and my understanding of what Gemba means in Japanese, is going where the work is, and understanding what are the issues that your people, are dealing with, and being there side by side with them. That's going to get that trust.
Yep.
So speaking of trust, as a leader, and we've discussed this, in previous episodes before, but leaders are typically charged with managing change, some sort of change, small changes, big changes, in the course of their tenures as leaders, in the course of business. So what are your thoughts about how leaders can help effectively manage change in an organization?
I think first you really need to understand the catalyst or the reasoning behind the change. So some things might be outside of our control. Many of us experienced that in 2020, when we had to kind of shift into,
with the pandemic.
Yeah. I mean, it's not something that was planned. We just had to figure it out. Right. But so understanding the catalyst for the change. And if it is something that's planned, what's the reasoning? So what, for that level within a company or an organization that's decided that they want to make this change, understanding the reasoning behind that, I think is really important, because once you understand the reasoning and the catalyst, you can understand what might be hurdles to achieving it. You can understand, you can start talking to the folks who will be impacted and determine the risks and, kind of work it from there. Communication and buy-in, I think are vital. So, if folks aren't bought in, it's going to take a lot longer to get there, or you might never get there.
Right.
Allowing folks to have some level of ownership in the change. So not necessarily dictating every little piece, but, here's the higher vision. Here are the critical pieces we're going to implement, and, working with the various teams that have to, make this change happen,
right.
to empowering them to figure out ways to put their flavor to it.
Involving them in making the change so that they feel their voices are heard.
Exactly. And just like, when I went into that project and had to figure out, what changes need to be made, that was kind of a different type of change. But I think it's also important to have a keen eye and a keen ear open for either processes or people or whatnot that may not work well with that change, right? I mean, sometimes as an organization's culture changes, once in a while there might be a process or a person or whatever that's just not going to fit within that change. And I think it's important to not just exile. If it's a person, don't exile that person. You got to talk to them and be honest with them and open with them and figure out what would work. Is it a different seat on the bus? Is it, is it maybe a different role? Is it just altogether not a right fit? If so, then, let's help each other. Let's help you, find something that is a right fit. And not being afraid to have that conversation. So there's so many elements that you have to consider. And it's not just the people and the processes, it's really and truly the whole thing. So.
Right. The whole system. And that the change is enacting or being enacted in. And I think you said something really keen there about, talking about the why of the change, the business reasons for the change. And also one thing that, we've heard and enact when we're helping organizations change from being completely breakdown maintenance or reactive, or not having those foundational business processes in place and trying to get them into a state of efficiency so they can optimize to use technology. But, we often talk about introducing the risk of not changing. What happens if we don't? And not doomsday scenario. But, here's the business reasons why. Here's why we want to change. Simon Sinek, the why, and then okay, people, if we don't change, here's what we're looking at, and so
that's part of the with them, right? The what's in it for me.
The what's in it for me. Yeah.
And that's feeds into that buy-in, right? So if a lot of times people, for example, are scared of automation or, the Internet of Things. They're scared of bringing in all of these nasty,
with Industry 4.0, it's a big concern, So.
But, that I think having that honest dialogue and explaining the benefits and the risks, I mean, then people are okay. I think actually everything with me is a cultural reference, so I'm going to apologize up front.
No,
But
bring it out there. Hashtag it. Let's go.
But I go back to the Johnny Depp version, the Willy Wonka with Johnny Depp, right? And there's a scene in there where the dad works at the factory, and you see, and the press is there, and then they want to bring in automation. And at the end of the movie, they show the dad, and everything worked out okay because while he wasn't having to do the physical attributes in the manufacturing facility, he was now the guy fixing the machines that were doing it, right? So sometimes people are scared of that automation and technology from a change perspective, but, just because this is becoming simplified doesn't mean that there's not new tasking and new needs.
It drives opportunities, right? It fosters opportunities. And I think that, that's messaging. That's the what's in it for me. That's a messaging that comes from leaders, right? That's the vision and providing those opportunities, to their people. So let's talk about any leaders out there that inspire you, because I think, so let's say, any influencers out there or leaders, that you see that you say, yeah, that individual has done some of those right things, or that you see in choices they've made or ways that they've led that inspire you. Anybody? It doesn't have to be current. It could be someone from the past.
Sure. So actually,
ideally real though, not fictional. This time.
No, this is real.
Although I do
promise. I promise. So you mentioned in the Go Tar Heels, right? So I'm born and bred, bleed Carolina blue, and my whole life growing up, Dean Smith, who is the basketball coach for the Tar Heels for many, many years, and most of my life, my young life anyway. Dean Smith was my hero. So every answer from like kindergarten on up, who's your hero? It was, Dean Smith. And, he eventually ended up writing a leadership book, and I was fortunate enough to get to meet him when I was in college, which was actually a couple of times, but which was pretty cool. But, as a leader, he was really, unique, I would say, in that, even some of the players who didn't make his team, he would stay in touch with them, throughout their life, throughout their career. He was always there from a mentor perspective, not just for his, the players who played for him, but for other folks as well. And Michael Jordan, fantastic basketball player, phenomenal businessman, right?
Absolutely.
Up until Dean Smith passed away, they were still very, very close, and he would call him, throughout his life. Michael Jordan would call Dean Smith throughout his life to talk about decisions.
Wow.
And another thing, in addition to just that, mentorship, lifelong mentorship, which I think is just really awesome. And it feels good, for me personally, when, former employees and folks that have moved up, we talk, and they'll, ask me for advice, or I call them and ask them for advice, based on, what they're doing. But I think something else that Dean Smith did really well as a leader is that tough love aspect. So I remember one basketball, I can't remember who we were playing, but there was a game. It was one of those critical, March Madness basketball games.
Oh yeah.
And back in the 80s, and one of the the star player, Dean Smith sat him on the bench for the first half of the game. Right? Like, who's going to do that in the middle of a tournament? It's like, but
and the fans are probably like, why?
Right. But that player, he had messed up. He got real mouthy. He was starting to take credit, for the whole team. I mean, he was just
disrespectful.
Yeah. And so Dean's felt that, tough love, right? You're going to sit on the bench. That's not the behavior that's acceptable. And, think about that. So you're the star player, you might be able to go in there and help and fix things, but now you feel bad because you're not contributing and you're not a part of that team, right? And so I think it emphasized the criticality of being a team player, literally, right?
Right.
So I just thought, the tough love that he would put out there, it's pretty incredible. So.
Yeah. No, that's a great story. Thank you for sharing. So I want to give our listeners, if you have any recommendations on, resources, or you just mentioned the book, and maybe we could leave that, in the episode notes. But are there any other books or resources that you would recommend to our listeners to check out, that, kind of represent, I guess, the things that we've been talking about today about, accountability and courage and knowing your strengths and giving back, and taking care of your people? Any recommendations?
The one that really comes to the forefront of my mind. I go all the way back to like who's, what was it? Who's got your cheese, or who's moving your cheese? Like the way back in the
Right,
day.
the classics.
Yeah,
right.
I'll be honest. I can't think back to the classics and say, oh, well, that's definitely impacted. I mean, they're great, they're amazing, but just for me, they haven't stuck with me. But I was fortunate enough a few years back to participate in a seminar, and there's also a book associated that's called Extreme Ownership, and it's Jocko Willink, and he was just really just amazing, former Navy SEAL, and then he retired and opened up a leadership consulting business.
Oh, wow.
And he's got a bunch of books out, but Extreme Ownership in particular is the one that I read, and the seminar was focused around. And basically, he uses real scenarios from his SEAL days,
Mm-hmm.
and to emphasize various leadership principles. And so, so throughout, you just hear these gut wrenching, just real world battle and scenario. I mean, you talk about leaders, on the front lines, life or death decisions.
Literally,
that's, it makes everything that I do from a day-to-day basis be very small, right? And so he's using those and talking through owning it. And really, it means, as a leader, if something goes wrong, it kind of goes back to, I guess we talked about it earlier, right?
We did.
So if somebody makes a fatal flaw on the team, it's my fault as the leader, and I need to own that, take responsibility for it, and figure out what I could have done better. Even if you think that you've done every possible thing you can, you've talked to somebody, you've told them over WebEx, you've documented it, you've done all the things. There's always something that as a leader we could do different and if we're not succeeding, it's because we're not doing something different. So it was just really engaging, and that whole thought of just owning it. And it's on, if everybody, regardless of your role in a business, if you own it and you own the mistakes, and rather than something goes wrong and everybody's trying to point fingers, if everybody's pointing the finger back at themselves and saying, hey, I screwed up, I should have done X and Y.
What was my piece of this?
We'll get to resolution, I think, a lot better. And it's hard. I mean, it's hard a lot of times in a big forum to say, oh, that was me, right? But it's that, to me, that was just a very inspiring thing. And I of course very much respect the military and all the sacrifices that our veterans have made for us, and to hear those stories and then have those applied to business scenarios was just really neat.
I think that's an excellent recommendation. Thanks so much. I think our listeners will really benefit from that, and from your experience, and from you sharing, your leadership genesis story with us today. I just want to thank you for your time, because this has been so much fun to learn more about you. I think if I were gonna do some hashtags for this episode, I'd repeat some of the words that we were just talking about today. Well, first I'd start with own it, in terms of leadership. And then, another one would be courage. Another one would be trust and credibility. Another one would be take care of your people. Another one would, just a phrase is, help people to learn and to grow. Communication, written and verbal. No regrets, know your strengths. So thank you again, Bambi, for joining us today and for sharing your altruistic and very, very practical own it approach to leadership. It's been a fun episode. So if you were going to leave our learners, okay, you're going to have to cut that one. You're going to have to cut that one, Kim. Okay. If you were going to leave our listeners with one final thought, Bambi, what would it be?
I would say, just get out there and be proactive, be a team player. You'll lift yourselves up and in whatever capacity or role that you want to be in. So just treat your teammates correctly and you'll get there.
That's right. That's right. So to all you leaders out there and aspiring, take that as inspiration. If people want to find out more about you, Bambi, or connect with you, you're on LinkedIn.
Yep.
Bambi Hoyt, we'll share that with our listeners. You can also find Bambi if you go to lce.com. She's right there on the About Us page. Again, Bambi, it's been great talking with you about your leadership style. And thanks for sharing your experience with our listeners today. So until next time, listeners, signing off at the Leadership Connection. I can't wait to see you next time. Thanks. Bye-bye.